You are now listening to the House by the Video Store podcast.
Groovy. No more room in hell. The dead will walk here. We have such sights to show you.
I kick ass for the Lord.
Praise God, big boy.
Welcome to the House by Video Store podcast. I'm your host, William, and joining me today will be Sean.
Hello.
And Derek.
Hello.
And in this episode, we'll be discussing the classic 1960 Alfred Hitchcock film Psycho. But before we get to that, we'll go through some recent news and things we've been watching. And some recent news involves a director who, our last podcast was discussing a movie that he produced. And that is that Eli Roth has been attached to two relatively high-profile projects, one starring Bruce Willis and one starring Jim Carrey. So the Bruce Willis one is going to be a remake of Death Wish, which is, of course, the classic Charles Bronson film. Although it seems like this one's been in pre-production for quite a while and had a number of different people kind of shuffle in and out. So him actually doing it, you know, once the cameras are rolling, I'll assume that's happening. But until then, it just seems more of a name being attached, because apparently Joe Carnahan was attached before, and he had done Smoking Aces and some other films, a lot of cop films. And then I think there's been some other people attached over time. So, we'll have to see if that actually comes to fruition. But Bruce Willis now, I wonder what the age difference is between him and Charles Bronson. I mean, Bruce Willis.
That's a good point. Was like in his 50s when they shot that movie.
Yeah, like Bruce Willis, what's funny with him is he plays a pretty wide age range depending on like the color that they make his beard or whatever.
Yeah.
In these different movies, as opposed to Charles Bronson was very much, they weren't trying to play his age down in those films.
Mm-hmm. Bruce Willis is 61.
Yeah, Bruce Willis is 61, and Charles Bronson, so he would have been 53, I believe, or around there when the first one came out. So Bruce Willis would actually be a bit older.
I just happened to watch that film like hours before that news broke, because I'd never seen it. Like there was just never, I never rented it, and it was never like anywhere that had access to it. So it was on I think it's on Amazon Prime right now, 1, 2, and maybe 3. I'm not for sure, but definitely 1 and 2. I enjoyed it quite a bit. It'll be very interesting to see how he updates it. It's going to take somebody with some finesse to, I guess, deal with some of the issues of vigilante justice and, the use of firearms.
No, man.
In 2016.
It's making America great, one dead punk at a time.
That's really I mean, this film could easily slip into that and like have a whole group of people rally behind it. They're like, oh yeah, Death Wish makes everything justified. But so it's Eli Roth is going to have to,
bring all of his deft touch and his sensitivity to it.
I think he may need to pass around that script a couple times before he starts rolling on cameras to get some different opinions on it.
Well, too, wasn't like the second or third one, or I forget which one it was, where he actually used like a grenade launcher and blows people up, or an RPG?
No, it was the last one. I think it was like 5 or 6, whatever the last one was.
After that first one, Canon Films took over.
Yeah.
And so then that's when I think it started going way off, little bit more off the rails.
He also killed Jeff Goldblum in the first one.
Jeff Goldblum.
Spoiler alert. Yeah, Jeff Goldblum.
Did he actually kill him?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he killed him.
In real life, it's just been the ghost of Jeff Goldblum since then. He's what's powering the new Independence Day film.
I couldn't remember it. Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, because he did find him, didn't he? That's right.
Yeah, but basically, like, those movies are just about some punks like raping and murdering women. And
No.
Taking
not
out
women. His wife and his daughter.
Yeah.
In like every single subsequent movie until his daughter commits suicide, she gets raped or beat. So like it's not funny, but it is, because like his daughter has like the worst life for like the next like 10 years because of this or whatever.
And
I think she kills herself.
They should just call that Rape City.
Yeah.
And it's
You
all
know, like
on,
I would love it if Jeff Goldblum pulled an Independence Day and reprised his role in the remake.
Yeah, so he, instead of being like a 20-something or younger, chain ganger, Jeff Goldblum's got to be in his 60s now too.
Yeah, he can just be some old creepy guy that some drifter. I think that would be great.
See,
I think it'd be even funnier if Jeff Goldblum was the one that
I was going to say that if Jeff Goldblum was in the Charles Bronson role, he's like, I'm going to kill you.
Yeah, he was actually credited as freak number 1.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, so that's a movie that it made a lot of waves on social media. I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, I don't really think I have high hopes for that. I mean, Bruce Willis is in it, so probably at worst case scenario, it's get like a Die Hard.
But what's funny is Bruce Willis, in like current day Bruce Willis, he'll do strong work with good directors and something like Looper, and then
he's been doing some straight to DVD stuff.
And I was gonna say he does a pretty big deluge of straight to DVD stuff because I think the foreign distribution of those is pretty lucrative because he's still a pretty big name internationally. So he'll get a nice little chunk of change to go shoot a movie in 2 weeks. And I mean, like, hell, I go shoot a movie in 2 weeks for like $2 million, like cash.
Somebody,
nice vacation.
Locally here in Louisville I've worked with before, he was posting on Facebook a while back about some film Bruce Willis is in. I think it's already out that his friend was either directing or was nearly co-starring with him in, and I can't remember what it was. But yeah, it was, it was somebody I knew that wasn't anybody huge. I can't remember the name of that movie though.
Well, you see a lot of movies on Netflix.
It was an action movie.
You see a lot of stuff on Netflix have like all these big names in it, but it's just some direct-to-DVD schlock that you never heard of and no one's reviewed and nobody talks about.
Yeah, I think it could have been Extraction, possibly.
But what's funny is in this AV Club article, so the other movie that Eli Roth is attached to is going to star Jim Carrey, and it is Alistair Arcane, a film adaptation of a 2004 comic from the same guy that did 30 Days of Night, which was made into a movie a number of years back. And I'm just reading this article from the AV Club, and the weird thing was they're discussing Eli Roth. They're like, maybe the director whose last 2 films were surprisingly smart, Knock Knock and the luridly violent The Green Inferno. The Green Inferno was not smart. Like, I don't want to go back into a discussion of that film. I know some people like it, but I don't think anybody could say it's smart. All the social messaging was banging you over the head with its terrible acting and dialogue. And then I think he retroactively attached things to it. Like when they shot the movie, social justice warrior wasn't even a term that people really were aware of at that point. And then he kind of talked about that before the movie came out, but it's on the shelf for 2 years. So
somebody referred to that film as having a tone of like a near slapstick comedy.
I mean,
I don't know if that's them like giving it the benefit of the doubt or if that was his intention. I definitely think he tried to have some humor to it, but for me, like, it didn't play well.
There's a scene where somebody violently shits all over the place and it's supposed to be played for laughs. So this, it's about cannibals, so there's some marijuana involved, so of course there's a munchies joke.
Yeah.
And then there's a dude that just starts jerking off for no reason in the middle of a very tense situation. So, yeah. Sorry if I spoiled those moments for you. And some very incredibly cringeworthy dialogue. I think I don't remember because I haven't watched it since we saw it, but wasn't there a line along the lines of like activism's gay? I think that was literally what somebody said.
Yeah, I believe so. Mm-hmm.
I just remember that. It's like, wow, that I think it was the original Cabin Fever. They said, they asked one of the characters, why are you shooting squirrels? And he's like, because they're gay. So I guess it's just a default insult from Eli Roth. But yeah, we'll see how those movies turn out.
So do you think he's left leaning? You think he's more liberal or Republican? I would just assume more liberal, but I haven't really been able to gauge based on his films.
Yeah, I mean,
I just wonder how he is going to approach Death Wish.
His films,
being that it is a sensitive, this could be a very sensitive topic right now.
It also seems like his sensibilities, like his first few movies, like Cabin Fever, Hostel 1 and 2, and even Green Inferno, are all about mostly white kids. There's some other people mixed in there, but mostly like suburban kids who go out in the world and get their comeuppance for daring to go on vacation. So
Yeah,
I'm not sure what that worldview even is.
If I was, what's Lepore of the leader of the NRA, I would start funding some movies like Death Wish. I would start putting financial backings behind these films, to like drum up, I guess, enthusiasm for the use of weapons.
Or you could, like the Purge Louisville thing that happened a couple years ago. So if you're not aware, there was some kid that made a really poorly photoshopped version of one of the movie posters from the Purge, and so there's going to be a purge happening in Louisville, Kentucky, and people, that had just been circulating. No one knew necessarily where it came from. And people were losing their shit for the most part. A lot of people were, and the news media was playing it up like this is a big thing. And then the night of, there were a lot of people doing prank phone calls and, facetious phone calls to the police about all the stuff that was happening. So people were listening to these police scanners. And if you only listened to that and looked at Twitter, you would have thought that there was like massive body count and things being burnt to the ground. And part of it was people on Twitter were like retweeting fake things.
Yeah.
And like Anonymous and different groups have done that over time where they create a bunch of fake reports of things to help, further their own agenda.
Yeah.
So
I've mentioned before, I was working in news at the time, and I worked the night shift too. None of us were looking forward to that. But thankfully it was like we sit there and listen to the scanners, and yeah, it was just total bullshit most of the time. Like we were laughing at most of it. Somebody did get murdered, but it was totally unrelated. Yeah. It was a typical Louisville night.
Yeah, but so back to the news. Like we'll see what happens with these Eli Roth projects. Like I said, it's kind of odd that he would get to move up the food chain and work with Jim Carrey after two movies that I don't think made much money, but maybe there's.
Well, I think is working with Jim Carrey nowadays really going up, the food chain.
True, he was in Kick-Ass 2 that we talked about how cheap it felt despite having a decent budget.
I enjoyed Kick-Ass 2, but I mean Jim Carrey's not the star. He didn't have the star power he had in the early 2000s, late 90s,
Yeah, back in Cable Guy when he got $20 million to be in that film. Yeah, he's not at that level now.
Yeah, I mean, because think about what was the last big thing that he was even in?
Dumb and Dumber 2.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And an anti-vaccination campaign.
Is he an anti-vaxxer? I know they split up.
Oh, I just saw that like in that article on AV Club, they said since 2014's Dumber and Dumber 2, he's been too busy telling parents not to vaccinate their kids.
Oh, so I guess he's on that train too with her. So, I just didn't know if he was like if their views were aligned since they have since split.
Maybe Eli Roth should make a anti-vaccination campaign commercial where somebody just violently shits in the corner and somebody starts jerking off. But
why don't you make that parody video?
I don't know. That might go too
we could
far.
Just find somebody to play Jim Carrey.
Just get somebody.
I love Jim Carrey as a kid, for the record, and I even liked Dumb and Dumber too. I have to say,
we had like The Mask and Dumb and Dumber and like all this stuff and Ace Ventura, like all these things that came out in a very short period of time, and he skyrocketed to absolute stardom.
Yeah,
and then
rightfully so.
He had some missteps off and on. Then he had some other big hits, and then since then it seems like he's kind of hit or miss.
Mm-hmm.
Like his last real big hit that I remember, and I'm probably wrong, was like Bruce Almighty, and that was what, like 14 years ago, I guess.
It was when I was in high school.
12.
Yeah, it was at least 10 years, but that was a huge hit. But he's had stuff since then that did well.
Yeah,
I mean,
he did that. That's what is that movie? 13.
The number.
And then he did Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Like I know that was all kind of around the same era, but
that was 2004.
Yeah, that movie was very good.
And that's a movie though, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Every alternative person I know, especially alternative females, list that as one of their favorite movies. It's like everybody said that was their favorite movie for a period of time.
Yeah.
Despite like, and I watched it like, it's okay, but
it's what's that movie that Christopher Nolan did? It's Memento. It's like the Memento as like a love story almost.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? We completely forgot to say that Jim Carrey is in Batman Forever.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I knew that, but that was like, what,
95.
97?
95.
Yeah, I think that was 95.
Yeah, because like from 94 to like, God. Like
Okay, so
2003.
from 94, so is Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, Batman Forever. Like, that's when he was at the height of his powers. And he did Ace Ventura: When Nature Calls, which is a little bit of a letdown box office wise. The Cable Guy, Liar Liar, The Truman Show, Simon Birch, Man on the Moon, Me, Myself, and Irene, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, The Majestic, Bruce Almighty.
Majestic's pretty good. Man on the Moon's really good too.
Yeah, man.
That was during his Oscar bait period.
Yeah.
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, A Series of Unfortunate Events, Fun with Dick and Jane, The Number 23, Yes Man.
Yeah,
so he was in a
Fun
bunch
Dick
of
and
stuff.
Jane was not good.
And that movie cost like $100 million to make, which I don't understand.
Yeah, and like Yes Man was very awful. But
And his early television career as Fire Marshal Bill on In Living Color.
But yeah, so that's kind of the news with the Eli Roth stuff. Like I said, we'll see what happens, and maybe not working in with such I don't want to say schlocky material, but material that's so obviously trying to ape these older films. Maybe if he does something that's a little, well, then Death Wish just a remake, but maybe this other one with Jim Carrey would be something where he actually tries to write good dialogue and.
Well, I mean, maybe he'll actually direct a script that he didn't write.
Wait a minute.
Some of these,
Wait a
you
minute.
know.
both movies, the one with Bruce Willis would just have yippee-ki-yay motherfucker on loop. And then the next one, Jim Carrey will only say, I'm smoking. And that's only 2 lines of dialogue in those movies.
They should just do a crossover because wasn't Jim Carrey in a Dirty Harry movie, which was in a very similar vein to the Death Wish movies? Although I'd say the Dirty Harry movies had a little bit more artistic integrity going into their sequels, possibly. But
hey, if y'all hear what sounds like monsters, it's just my dogs fighting over a tennis ball to the death. So,
So just very briefly, other news. I know we talked about the show Hannibal before, and they discussed like, could it come back or not? Yeah, it's no Dragon Ball Z.
hey, I haven't referenced that in like
You got
months.
burnt.
But it's like in terms of like the horror shows on television, despite the fact that it was on network TV, it showed a lot more gore than a lot of stuff on cable. But
Are they paying you money to talk
But did
about
anybody
this show?
go Super Saiyan in Hannibal, William?
Yes, please. Do they?
Well,
How
if
much
you use-
money do you get from them to talk about this show?
Well, if you-
you're like the
speaking of-
one man that
Speaking
watched
of
it.
anime, they're apparently possibly in talks to have Justin Lin direct that Kira live action.
But haven't they been discussing a live action version of that for forever?
Yeah, a very long time, but you
And
know,
I'm sure if they do decide to make it, they'll do some whitewashing with the casting that makes everyone upset, like they did with
well,
everything else.
at least they've got Justin Lin. I don't know if he's actually. I just assume he's Asian.
No,
I
he-
got James Wan and was it him that I got mixed up with James Wan?
No, you're talking about James Wong or Jim Wong and James Wan.
Yes, that's
Jim
who I
Wong
got
was one of the
mixed up
guys from the X-Files, one of the writers and the directors of the new episodes. But yeah, Justin Lin, like I read an article, I think Wired had a good article about like him growing up and stuff, getting into the film biz. But
Yeah, I love the anime. I don't need a live action, but man, they could do some cool stuff visually with that. Like it's one of my favorite films. So if they do anything with it that is somewhat good and just like gives that same sort of energy, then I'll be happy. Like that'll be awesome. That it'll make people actually watch it that normally wouldn't watch anime.
well, I think a few years ago, didn't they discuss Keanu Reeves being in it?
Yeah, there was a lot. Leonardo DiCaprio, like early on, was I think somebody that was attached to it. I was following that for a long time, but yeah, there's been tons of people attached to it and everything. Hopefully, I don't know. I don't say hopefully they'll make it because it could be a disaster, but.
Well, I think a lot of anime stuff doesn't translate very well to live action because you look at the live action adaptations that have occurred, at least through through the U.S. studio system, have not been.
Yeah, I mean, and two, the end of Akira, like the story of that film, it starts out somewhat like okay, and then it gets really not just weird. I'm fine with weird, but it almost got confusing, and I didn't really understand some of it. I haven't watched it in a couple years, but I remember being a little confused by it, but not caring because the visuals were so awesome and just kind of the feel of that film. I mean, it was the anime version of Blade Runner almost, set in Japan.
With no Harrison
That's basically
Ford.
just what I want. Yeah.
Let's see. So, just back to Hannibal. So, they've been discussing if they could bring the show back, and the showrunner Brian Fuller said that they can investigate their options, and the first time that they can really talk about too much or start looking into it seriously would be August 2017. So, a year and a few months off where they could even talk about the revival of the show or whatever form that would take. And I think that's just contractually and things like that. But they said they have a story and everyone's ready to do it. So we'll see what comes of that. I think that was pretty much all the news that came out the past week or so that was all that relevant to the horror world. So I guess now I can move on to what we've been watching. And I'll just kind of briefly go through the things I've been watching and go to everyone else. So the movie that... the only reason I haven't really watched it because it was on HBO on their on-demand stuff, and the Rob Zombie thing we did, the Thanksgiving dinner, somebody commented, it's like, oh, they must have really liked Scary Movie 2, which is funny because when we were writing that short, like I think Derek mentioned that scene from Scary Movie 2 with the turkey getting basted and with and stuff.
Yes.
So I saw that comment. I was like, yeah, that's actually kind of funny. Then it was on HBO, so I rewatched it. And, the scary movies like 1 and 2, I think, they're not good movies really, but they're still funny. They're funny to rewatch them just because it's a little bit different style of humor. I mean, now a lot of that stuff recently they've made have not been good.
Well, because it's not the Wayans brothers doing it.
Well, I mean,
anymore.
like not even just so they have like Scary Movie 1 and 2, and I think with 3 it went to the Zuckers and then different teams. Yeah, and it had like Charlie Sheen and everybody in it, but like. I mean, like 1 and 2 are the Wayans brothers, but they've made stuff since then, or at least that one of them has been in like a haunted house or something that was not good. But Scary Movie 2, there's some pop culture references in it. They're a little bit dated, but I still remember like they make fun of a Nike commercial. They're dribbling a basketball, and but then,
in the wheelchair.
Yeah, but you look back to that movie, and you had David Cross, Tim Curry, Anna Faris, the Wayans. You had other people in that would go on to be, that are funny people. So I think that contributed to the movie being enjoyable.
Yeah.
And there's a scene where David Cross's character gives himself a blowjob. So
yeah.
He's obsessed with, I can do it myself.
And it's got Tori Spelling in it, all this stuff. So it's kind of funny to go back and rewatch that because it's kind of a time capsule from that era of pop culture.
I mean, that came out when we were in high school, and like I'll do it with my strong hand. Like, that was like very heavily quoted film,
and that was
during that era.
Still to this day, I mean, I still hear people use that one anyway.
And that came out too, like, because one of the things they were kind of referencing was 13 Ghosts, because they had like the glasses they wear and stuff. So we need to do some of those late 90s, early 2000s like horror remakes and stuff. Like The Haunting and House on Haunted Hill and 13 Ghosts and all the stuff that came out in the era.
Tony Shalhoub as the monk, as the dad in 13 Ghosts, I still like that movie.
So they've made scary movies since then. I watched a little bit of Part 5 because it's on Netflix. And it's
so bad.
Yeah, it's not good at all. So I don't know that anybody's going to make any of those movies that are anywhere approaching decent anymore. I mean, I think there's ample
the Wayans brothers did like the Paranormal Activity ones, right?
Yeah, I think that's like a haunted house or something.
Yeah, I liked the first one they did.
Yeah, because a haunted house had Marlon Wayans in it.
Yeah.
And like
I laughed quite a bit at the trailers for those, but I never saw them.
Yeah, I like the first one they did. I haven't seen the second.
It could also be the fact that I'm not 16 when I watch these now. Yeah. I'm an adult, but so I watched that. Another thing I watched was Sin City: A Dame to Kill For. That's also on Netflix now, and that movie, like, it kind of bombed at the box office and didn't get very good reviews. And it's kind of ironic. Like, I think if they'd released that, like, a year or two after the original, I think it would have done just fine. The first Sin City was, it wasn't like a huge blockbuster, but it was a solid hit and made a lot of money for the budget.
And it was heavily talked about as well.
Because of the style. But so the first one came out in 2005. This came out in 2014. So 9 years for a property that saw comic book stuff explode in its wake. Like, I don't think Sin City had much to do with comic books exploding, but like Sin City and 300 and all that like kind of graphic novel stuff. that started getting popularity. So I think coming out the sequel 9 years later is a bit late. And
Was anybody even in it from the original?
yeah, Mickey Rourke and Jessica Alba are in it.
What about Bruce Willis?
He's in it kind of like in flashbacks or visions. And then you
Isn't
have
Josh Hartnett in it?
he was in the original. He's not in this one. Then you have some of the like the bit players, like Jamie King's back in it. Rosario Dawson's back, and you have Josh Brolin in it.
Yeah, who did he replace?
Josh Brolin replaced Clive Owen.
That's right.
As the character Dwight, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt was a new character, and Eva Green was a new character. So it wasn't a bad movie, and it's just I think that stylistic shtick kind of wore off for a lot of people, and the cast isn't quite as star-studded now as the original was when it came out. Mm-hmm. Like I said, it wasn't terrible, but I don't think it was as good. I don't think it was as enjoyable as the first one, and they waited too long. Like I said, if it came out in a year or two of the first, I think it could have still been a pretty decent hit. But as it is, coming out 9 years later was probably a bit too much of a break.
I mean, that's a long time. Like, kids are born and are 9 years old, and you know what I mean? Like, that's a long time. Like, I can't imagine, a film coming out, say, in 85 when I was born, and then a sequel come out in 95. That would almost just seem like, oh, this is like a throwback film,
Well, it's
like, I think because I'm older, it's like, oh, it's not that, it's 9 years, not that long, but really, like, that's a very long time to kind of pick up a second film. It's not even like a third film; it's the second film.
Yeah,
yeah, and it's like you look at the way, like, just because it's a comic book, you look at the way the current comic book movies are. They're spitting them out every 2-3 years.
Yeah,
so you have like within 6 years.
Marvel will have like 2 in 1 year.
So from 2005 to 2014, the Marvel Cinematic Universe came into existence. They made 5 movies that led up to Avengers, and Avengers 2, and all this stuff in the time it took for Sin City to have a sequel come out.
Yeah,
but yeah, that was pretty much all the stuff I watched. So, Derek, did you watch anything?
Me and my girlfriend did watch Drive I've watched Drive many times. She watched it for the first time, which I love that movie. It's one of my all-time favorites. I always forget that I always want to say Oscar Wilde, and I don't know why. Oscar Isaac is in it. Yeah, and I forget that because I haven't watched it in like a year or so. And when I first watched that movie, I didn't really know who he was because when the movie came out in 2011. Yeah, but it's just funny seeing him in it now because he's been in a lot of different stuff. But yeah, it's just still one of my favorites. The score's awesome in it, and it just feels like it doesn't feel like a movie came out in 2011. It feels more like a movie came out like the 60s or 70s.
So isn't there I think there's a Dodge commercial now with Jim Gaffigan about a minivan where it has one of the songs they probably use in Drive.
Oh, Chromatic or something.
Yeah.
Or is it? It was just like, it sounds like the clock. It's probably one of the songs that Chromatics did.
I just wish that in that commercial, Jim Gaffigan would curb stomp somebody's face or.
One thing I forget how gory that movie actually is. Because there's actually quite a few good gore scenes in it.
Well, and that's a movie too where they got sued by some lady that saw it because they promoted it where it looked like the Fast and Furious, and it was like a very much like a throwback 80s kind of synthy neon vibe.
Well, it's almost like a noir
crime film.
Too.
Yeah, crime film with a couple of moments of extreme violence and a protagonist who barely talks.
Well, that other news came out about Nicholas Winding Refn wanting to direct Batgirl. Did you hear that?
I'll believe that when I see it.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to let him touch that, to be honest. But you never know. They may, if it was Marvel, they might be like, DC might be kind of scrambling and thinking okay, this could kind of get us something. But yeah. Did you watch anything else, Derek?
No, I haven't. That was mainly it. I've been real busy past couple weeks, but I just wish they'd make more films like Drive, because it's just one movie I watched and I was expecting, like y'all were saying, more of a Fast and Furious type, but because that's the way it was kind of portrayed in commercials and stuff, but I watched it and I was like, I don't know, this became one of my all-time favorites.
Yeah, that opening scene in that movie is so good.
Yeah, because in the entire movie there's maybe 3 bits of action kind of, but the trailer put all those 3 bits in a back-to-back, so all.
There's one car chase scene, and most of the commercials and trailers were heavily based around that. And that car chase scene isn't almost until the later parts of the movie.
Yeah. So did I talk about Trouble Every Day last week?
I don't remember.
I don't know if it's from a French director or what. I don't know. I'm not really going to touch on it too much. It's kind of an art house film that is a little bit about this kind of vampires. I don't really explain it. I didn't love it anyway. I'm glad I watched it, but yeah, I'm just throwing that out there. If anybody else has watched it, let us know what you think, because I haven't heard of anybody that's watched this film. I think somebody my wife works with mentioned that they said they loved it. I didn't love it, but I kind of appreciate it. Different tone, different pace than typical, I guess, genre films, which I always like. And then I did watch The Neon Demon, so Nicholas Winding Refn's new film. And speaking of kind of a different flair on a genre film, so everybody keeps talking about, oh, this is like a horror film. There's been, talks of cannibalism in the film and stuff like that. And I think I realized I've seen, is that maybe Valkyrie? Is that what he did about the Vikings?
I believe so.
I mean, I know that Tom Cruise.
There's two Valkyries.
Valkyrie, yeah, I've seen that one as well. Anyway, it's like that film. He did the films I've seen of his is that one, Bronson, which I think Bronson, I don't know if that was based on a book or not. Of course, that's based on a real person. Then he did Drive, and then Only God Forgives.
That was Valhalla Rising.
Valhalla Rising, okay. And then The Neon Demon. And I think I realized where he may work best in is that, post-Drive, Bronson was great. I thought that movie was great. Valhalla Rising, I feel like that was a little loose and kind of unfocused. Some people really liked that movie. It didn't kind of hit me as much as it did some people. But, The Neon Demon, that was original idea of his. Only God Forgives, same thing. Drive, that is, it was based on a book, and it was very much more of a specific genre, like a crime film. And I think that's maybe where he probably makes the most films that are more satisfying to a general audience. Because Drive's one of my favorite films of all times too. But it's everything, at least especially past that, has been he's very much kind of indulging in, I guess, a lot of his ideas and coming up with some original concepts, or at least concepts that have built off some other things. But this film very much, The Neon Demon is not a genre film. There's not really a lot of horror to it. There's one scene that is okay, great, this is a horror movie now. And yeah, there's a little bit of cannibalism. There's maybe one or two other things that people have thrown around. If you hear the words, then you can see the scene coming from a mile away when it starts. If you kind of know these topics they're dealing with, and people were, kind of, I guess, shocked by them at Cannes and very surprised and repulsed. But honestly, some of the films we watch, the schlocky stuff and the kind of the way they handle some of these things, especially cannibalism, it's not grotesquely done in the film. there's it could be some unsettling things, but I mean, to both of us and probably most of our audience, it's not anything that's going to really shock us. And at the same time, there's kind of just little scenes of this, and it's not there's not a satisfying story arc as far as that genre goes. It's, of course, this is a female-led film. It's his first one. But honestly, most of the female characters are pretty boring. And Keanu Reeves, though, as soon as she shows up, he is awesome. He's not in it a lot, though. Keanu Reeves is awesome. The other male character in it is awesome. They feel like real people. But a lot of the female roles, they feel very flat. And I don't know if it's by design, because they are supposed to be models. And maybe it's a comment on their almost lack of identity, but it doesn't really, you're following this character and it really doesn't gel too much for you. You don't really there's not a strong narrative to hold on to. And then is that Elle Fanning?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly the pronunciation.
Yeah, I don't know either. Anyway, she does a good job with what she's given. She does a really good job with that, but she's not given a lot. She's more of a silent character, just like Ryan Gosling in Drive. But so it's hard to kind of, but he still felt like more like you had more of an idea of who he was without him speaking much. Her, you kind of do too, but it's just not super interesting. There's a little bit of mystery to her, but so you're not really intrigued by the plot a lot. You're waiting for something to happen. And then, her character, you're not super intrigued by her either, I don't think. And you kind of hope some things will wrap up in interesting ways at the end of it. But this is one of those endings where, it feels like stuff's just happening and then the film ends. And I was very, I was not a huge fan of it. I was like kind of along with it for a while. It opens up a little weak. And then I was kind of into it, especially when Keanu Reeves' character comes in. I was like, okay, I'm kind of getting into this now. But it kind of putters out for me. And that's when it's supposed to be becoming its most shocking, because that's when some of those more taboo subjects come into play. But it really just kind of putters out. And because it doesn't clinch that ending, I think I liked it. I definitely still liked it more than Only God Forgives from what I remember. I've only seen that film once. And I would recommend renting it or watching on Netflix when it comes out. But and I was really hoping I could kind of recommend this because I always want to give him a chance. But yeah, I was not super impressed with this film.
Well, I think this was picked up by Amazon, so I'm assuming it'll hit their Amazon Prime service at some point.
Yes.
Once the
you're absolutely right.
And just if you want to see it, so like I guess like what I read, it was kind of just his take on like Hollywood and the modeling industry and everything, kind of like a scathing rebuke of the industry.
Yeah.
And another movie that's similar idea, completely different execution is Starry Eyes, which I'd watched. That was okay.
I haven't watched that, but I want to. Yeah.
But it seems like just with Neon Demon, it's the same thing that's happened to people who love Drive. Or some of these other things. You think this can be like this kind of cool genre film, and then you go into it, and it's like, well, that's not what it was at all. And if you're open to the kind of open-ended, like, granted, I haven't seen this. I didn't even really watch the trailer because I try to avoid the trailer for things I might watch. But, if you're open to the kind of open story, non-plot-driven type experiences, or you're more into it for, like, the visuals and what's going on than story and plot, you can enjoy it. But if somebody went into this thinking it's going to be like a lesbian vampire movie about models and they thought it was going to be violent and stuff like Drive, it sounds like what you're saying is they would be quite disappointed.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some violence in here, but it's not, Drive kind of used it sparingly to a great effect, where it was like, it made it that much better when it happened, because you're like, oh man, he's getting serious now. This film... But everything else around Drive was great even without that. That just kind of was like a heightened moment of his personality that came seeping out, and you got more of an insight on like, oh, this guy, he's serious. Like he's done some stuff and he's willing to go far. There's not a lot hinging around that stuff. There's some overt commentary on modeling and stuff, and there's some scenes that made me laugh and some scenes I enjoyed, and I was enjoying like bits of it, fairly well. Like I enjoyed some of the film for sure. I just was really hoping he was going to clinch that ending, or just do something to make me, I don't remember what writer or director I believe it was a writer. He had somebody tell him, another writer or director, that it doesn't matter what you do in the film, you just got to like wow them in the end. And basically, if you have like a great ending, people will, forgive you for a lot of the film. And I was hoping this would have that, because it felt like it was building towards something. And there was some kind of, maybe some clues of some bigger things going on, or some ideas or characters, but it just kind of was like a world you stepped into and then you didn't finish watching the movie.
Yeah.
And it kind of had it. I mean, the last scene. Granted, yeah, I can see people being like, maybe a little shocked, but this wasn't like it's the most. If it was the most shocking scene in cinema of all times and nothing ever touched it, then yeah, you can say like, okay, well that was something enough to where he can lean on that. Like he earned that to handle it that way. But it wasn't anything that kind of reached outside of my boundaries of things I've watched or kind of, the genres that we all kind of spend our time in. So that's I think it was probably the most damning thing about it, is that the ending just didn't. It was just out there.
Yep. So
yeah.
So then we also, none of us saw The Shallows or Independence Day Resurgence. The Shallows, some of us might see at some point. Independence Day, I don't know that I'm going to see that, just because all reviews seem to say that it's unnecessary. And somehow
well,
as cheesy or worse than the original.
Well, speaking of movies that took a long time to get sequels, this took, 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, it came out in, was it 95 or 6? And the biggest sin was that they weren't able to get Will Smith. So the original came out in 96, this one came out in 2016, so you're talking about 20 years later, and you don't get your biggest star, who...
I think that killed this movie. I killed any big excitement around it. It probably killed, the film it could have been.
Well, I think it's from what I like. Once again, I haven't seen this. I'm just going based on what other people have said. It seemed like they tried to spread Will Smith's charisma across some of the new characters and other people, and it just didn't work.
Yeah, it's like you cannot replace Will Smith with the lesser of the two Liam brothers or whatever the name. They had brothers.
They had that one kid in it. Who, I guess they're trying to be a minor replacement for Will Smith. It's like a younger black kid.
I think that's his son, isn't it?
Yeah, is it his son? Okay, I was thinking it might have been. And he screams woohoo or says something, and it just feels so cheap. It's like, man, this feels like third rate Will Smith, and it draws attention to it. But at the same time, you're thinking, man, imagine what this trailer would have been like with Will Smith in it, like how excited I would have been for the film. I'm not saying I would have been, first in line or anything, but I would have taken a second look at it.
Yeah, because if you had Jeff Goldblum and Will Smith, then I'm extremely interested in it, because they had such a good, team in the first one.
I'm just curious, as I know that Will Smith was doing Suicide Squad, and that could be a big hit, but he's a part of an ensemble as opposed to Independence Day. He's part of an ensemble, but he's kind of the key character.
Yeah, he's kind of the man.
So I'm not sure. I mean, unless he just hated the script or whatever. He hasn't had a hit.
He didn't working with Roland Emmerich, He
hasn't had a big hit in a while either.
In the Suicide Squad casting, he's still the biggest name in that movie.
Yeah, but, I think he's overshadowed by the fact that the Joker's in it. And, for whatever amount of screen time he gets, he's still... And
Harley Quinn.
You got Harley Quinn, the Joker, Batman. So you got all this stuff going on in this universe, and he's kind of a minor character without any superpowers. So we'll see. But yeah, none of us saw that movie. Like I said, we might see The Shallows, but we'll see with
Shallows. I've been hearing very good things about that. I want to see that for sure.
Independence Day, I might watch it when it hits video or something, but I'm not encouraged to go see that. But so I guess now we can move into discussing Psycho, which Fizzo is one of my friends was called before, because this girl didn't know how to spell psycho. But the Psycho, so the 1960 film, I had read quite a bit about this. I'd obviously watched it when I was a kid. I grew up watching Alfred Hitchcock Presents when it came on Nick at Night. So, I was pretty well versed in Hitchcock and all that stuff. But, I didn't read a whole lot about the production of the movie until recently. And it's kind of funny, you watch this, you can kind of pick it out. But, it was a relatively low-budget movie compared to the other stuff Hitchcock had been doing. It was shot mostly with the TV crew from Alfred Hitchcock Presents. The black and white was to save money and also to help lessen the visceral gore and impact of it.
Yeah, and get it past the rating board.
Yeah, and of course we're doing full spoilers, because even if you haven't seen this movie, you've seen this movie.
You've seen all the iconic scenes from it.
This is Luke, I'm Your Father. This is something that's just such a cultural touchstone that everybody knows, even if they haven't seen the film.
Yeah, everybody has seen that shower scene in some way, shape, or form. There's no way that you're not introduced to it at some point. And it's just funny that, this movie was considered low budget and cheap at the time, and their initial reviews on it are a little bit mixed, but when it was a massive box office success and made a lot of money, then everybody's like, well, let's take another look. Okay. Yeah. And then they actually got some awards nominations and wins out of it. So, compare that to something, not comparing it in quality or whatsoever, just saying the way that Psycho is viewed in 1960 is similar to how something like, I don't know, Scream and, horror, like from Halloween and Texas Chainsaw and everything after, horror got a much different view from the general public and the critics than it had in 1960.
But I'll say this too, though, comparing to those other movies, like the acting in this for the time, because it's very much 1960s acting style, but even though there's not a whole lot of action or gore in it, it's still a very intriguing movie.
Oh yeah, this is like, it's such a fast watch. Like, I think this and Jaws, when they're on, I can sit there and just like watch them and it doesn't bother me. No matter how many times I see this or that film. Infinitely rewatchable.
Yeah. What's funny too is those movies were considered like horror at the time they came out. But if you ask a lot of people today, they would not really classify those movies as horror anymore.
Yeah, which is bullshit. I think, you know what I mean.
Well, to a lot of people, horror today means buckets of blood and dismemberments.
Well, it means whatever came out when they were alive. It's. Or whatever. It's just some rare, random, some rare film that is, that they found a VHS of. But no, I think absolutely like Psycho. I think the two biggest horror films of all time are probably Psycho and Jaws, and then everything after that is kind of Shining's like right there, a little bit under it, I think, and then after that you've got like Halloween, The Exorcist, Poltergeist. I think this and Jaws you can't be touched.
And you have some stuff that, like I've said, like controversially is considered horror, like Silence of the Lambs, where it won an Oscar for Best Picture, although a lot of people would not say that it is horror. I was just looking through like the IMDb like top 250. Not that list means anything because it's so heavily skewed towards like The Dark Knight's number 4. That was that's a good comic book movie. It's a good action and crime movie. It's not the 4th best movie of all time. Nowhere close to it. Lord of the Rings: Return of the King's number 8. Once again, good movie, solid genre movie. It's not the 8th best movie of all time.
Why do we call it the stupid Avatar movie? Isn't that like number 1 or something?
No. That's like box office gross. So number 1 currently is The Shawshank Redemption, then The Godfather and Godfather Part 2. So those are ones there's less to pick with there.
What list is this again?
Just the IMDb top 250.
Oh, well, Shawshank Redemption.
And this is based on user ratings. Right?
Yeah, and like I've read some articles about how heavily skewed these ratings are by male. Basically, like there's Batman Bros. And Lord of the Rings Bros, just a bunch of dudes who go and just upvote these movies into oblivion, trying to get their rankings higher and get them to be ranked number 1. Because remember when Dark Knight came out, there's a bunch of people who are like trying like hell to get to be number 1. It was number 1 for a while, and then anybody that made a negative review of that movie got death threats and incessant harassment online. But just looking through that list, so Silence of the Lambs at 23, I think is like 7 and Silence of the Lambs. 7's 22, Silence of the Lambs 23. So, like, 7 you could argue is horror. It's more of like a crime film that has horror elements. But, like...
It's very good.
Yeah, but, like, you keep going down. Then Psycho's at 34. But beneath that, like, Jaws is in here. But there's not a lot of horror films that show up in any of these types of lists. And, Alien's in here at 53.
Alien is another, I think, is, like, right under,
Shining's 59. Like I said, these ratings essentially mean nothing, but like Aliens is 64. There's a lot of stuff that's in here, but there's not like Halloween and Friday the 13th and a lot of those movies. They're not in here.
Well, and the reason, Friday the 13th, I think all of us can agree that none of those are like great films.
No, they're not.
But like Halloween is a really good film, but at the same time, like when you compare it to something like Psycho or even The Shining, like thematically it's much thinner than a lot of other films, and that's why it doesn't stack up to, I think, a lot of the other, more let's say mainstream films or the films that fall into other genres. Is just because there isn't that layer of depth. And like Psycho, even though it doesn't have, it has some thematic things that it pulls on for sure, but it has so many other elements that it kind of it really. It's really a masterfully made film and masterfully acted. Like there's just so much more to it that a lot of those other horror films that most other horror films, they just don't touch because that isn't their goal and it's not what they have to do.
Yeah,
to
one
find
thing,
success.
what you're talking about the characters in Psycho is like, I've seen this movie a lot over my lifetime, but like as far as like sitting down and watching from beginning to end, I can't remember last time. But like one thing is, like you said, it is it does feel like a fast watch.
Yeah.
But to me, I actually liked like every character in it.
Yeah.
Like even Norman Bates, like the guy that was him in that movie was great. He was so interesting. Like, and, it's one of those stories that's like now since this movie's came out, how many times have you seen a movie that has the twist this has in it? Like it's not. In this day and age,
this is the sleepaway camp before that. The person turns around and, it's like...
Like, I was reading up on this, too, like, and Hitchcock told, like, Janet Leigh and Anthony Perkins, like, that they could improvise a little bit their characters as long as it didn't require moving the camera anywhere he didn't want to be. So, like, Anthony Perkins is kind of the one that came up with, like, the tick of, like, eating the candy corn. Mm-hmm. And that just makes the character...
Like a bird.
What's funny is, so, like, we're not even really going to touch too much on the 98 remake by Gus Van Sant, but... Like, whereas Anthony Perkins, like, eating the candy or whatever comes across as, like, this guy's kind of weird, and it's, just kind of builds into his character. When Vince Vaughn does it, it's just kind of like, okay, this is creepy, and not in a good way.
Yeah, like, the Norman Bates character, to me, in the like, he didn't come off as, like, super creepy. He just came off as kind of like a hermit, like a shut-in, or a guy that wasn't,
Well, you immediately like him, for the most part, and then you kind of feel a little sorry for him. And then also too, even after after the murder, when he's like disposing of the car, you're kind of on his side then. And I think they were saying, like, in screening audiences or whatever, in the audience, watching audiences watch this film, that turn, they knew that's when people were kind of on his side, and they're like, okay, great, that's what we needed to get, to keep this film moving and to keep people's interest in. The film post Janet Leigh, who was like, a bold thing to kill her off. Which, did you watch much of William and I both have the Psycho Blu-ray collection with like 6 or 8 films or something.
Or like it's the Hitchcock collection that has, I think it has 5 films.
Yeah, Hitchcock. Yeah. Have you watched much of the bonus features on that?
No, I did not get a chance to.
Yeah,
I need to go back and watch more of them.
Actually, when I rewatched this, I watched it with a commentary because I've seen this film so many times, and then watched like a bunch of the special features, and then rewatched it again. Like, none of these films that we've ever done have I watched it with a commentary and the film by itself in the same week. So that kind of says a lot for it. But yeah, there's some fascinating stuff on the commentary. It's a film historian that is doing it, that wrote a book on the making of Psycho. But yeah, he kind of touches on the car going in, and then when people were kind of on his side then. And another thing too, showing the toilet in here was apparently like super controversial.
Yeah, which
nobody had ever showed a toilet before.
Well, in the opening scenes had Janet Leigh, Marion Crane's character, and her boyfriend Sam Loomis, like, on a bed, like she was
Unmarried.
in a bra.
Yeah.
They weren't married. That was very taboo for the time, which is kind of hilarious to think about into the context of today's world. But back then, that was something that caused issues. And there's so much stuff in this movie that seems pretty tame today that would be able to be like a PG-13, like on network TV during like a 5 p.m. time slot.
Yeah. Again, I watched this when I was really little. My parents showed it to me because, compared to everything else at the time, it was super tame. Another thing too about the audiences, before I forget, when he's like cleaning the bathroom up after the murder, apparently whoever the film historian was or the author of that book, in the commentary, he says he remembers being young watching this film in theaters, and some older ladies behind him, as he's cleaning up the blood of the bathroom, they say, "Oh, look at him, he's such a good boy."
Taking care of his mama's mess.
Yeah. He talks a lot about too the reactions that this film got when he was watching it, and it's just like super fascinating the way people reacted, and people were like screaming at moments when the sister opens up like the I guess dresser closet or whatever in the bedroom, like they screamed at that, like all these small moments. I mean, it's a fascinating commentary. It's very information dense. He's very a person that is about the information, but he kind of drops in a lot of things about his experience watching it in the audiences. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, I guess too. Like we didn't really discuss at all what the story is at all, but like assuming everyone is knows what's going on, it's just Marion Crane. Like I said, she's talking to her boyfriend. She works at her business. A guy comes in and drops off a $40,000 cash payment to buy a house, and leaves the money with Marion, and she's supposed to take to the bank. Instead, she runs off and ends up staying at Bates Motel, and he, of course, she dies because he kills her, and then it's the investigation into it by a PI who's being paid by the people looking into the missing money, and then her sister and her boyfriend. So it's a story that there's been a lot of stuff since then. It was based on a novel too, or a book that was adapted, but there's a lot of stories pretty similar to this have came out since this movie, and I'm sure there's a lot of books that probably had similar plots, but like the execution is 100% what sold this story to everybody. And two, like one thing I think is kind of hilarious, and you could never do this now. Have you seen like the theatrical trailer they showed for this, where it's just Alfred Hitchcock walking through the sets?
Yes,
and like briefly discussing the story, but then cutting himself off before he gives spoilers.
It's so great. Like I love that.
Could you imagine them doing that with like most directors today? People don't know who they are. Like the film geeks and people like us do, but the average audience doesn't know who a lot of these directors are. They know like Steven Spielberg, and that's probably about it. I
mean, that's how I knew. I also we did like a soundtrack swap on Psycho and It Follows. We posted it directly on our Facebook page, but I posted on my personal page, and like, he was one of the first directors I knew as a director, like him and Spielberg, because of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. So it's like, dude, he just like did a great service to building his brand, like with that show, and just little touches like that. And he put so much personality in those scenes. Like you saw it also come out in this film. Like, he did so much to kind of enhance the experience of watching his movies that were outside of just watching it.
And, like by far the most famous scene in this movie, and one of the most famous scenes of all time, is the shower scene that I think they said is comprised like 77 shots. And like when you watch it back in like slow motion and frame by frame, there's not an actual shot that shows the knife penetrating skin. There's one where it looks like it may, but it could have just been like the water and the lighting and the distance and everything, and the shadows could have made it look as if it's happening. But if you show like we always talk about like, okay, what happens if you show this to a modern audience? I think if you show this movie to a bunch of 16-year-old kids who've never seen it, they're probably not going to be that entertained, because that scene is so permeated in pop culture. It's not shocking, and there's not blood and guts, and so many elements of this movie have been aped by so much stuff after that. I think if you gave this to a group of 16-year-olds who had never seen it, I mean, it depends on who you're talking about, but a general audience who loves the gallows and all the jump scare ghost movies and found footage stuff, they're probably not going to care too much for this.
I would be interested to seeing, because like when we saw The Thing, people, I don't think that was holding up to audiences like I thought it would, to everybody. Some people were really into it, but I would be very interested to see how this is holding up to modern audiences as well. I think, unfortunately, when films are old and people can tell them, they immediately are kind of turned off by them, especially if they're black and white.
Yeah, which I think adds to the atmosphere in this movie.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah, I think it's beautiful. It's one of the things that makes it. I mean, in black and white.
And he did this after North by Northwest, and I didn't even realize that until actually I was like looking at the dates. I'm like, oh wow, I didn't realize he did that after the fact. I had always thought it was a black and white because he did it earlier on. But yeah, and I also heard in the commentary and stuff about how he self-financed it pretty much, and only spent like $800,000 on it.
The studio didn't like the idea of the novel being adapted into a movie. They didn't kind of like it, so then he had to do it. But on the cheap.
It was only $800,000 in 1960, so it makes you wonder what that actually.
Yeah.
But like when you compare this to say Halloween was made like on a roughly like three. I keep saying stuff weird today. Halloween was made on a roughly like $300,000 budget 18 years later. So, Psycho had a low budget for Hitchcock films, and it was really the majority of the movie took place at the motel and in the Bates house. So it was mostly one set, but you had like the office stuff at the beginning and the car lot and some of the driving stuff. And it's actually kind of funny. I was watching, I think it was the 4th episode of MTV Scream. I didn't mention earlier because I haven't really found too much to talk about in the show. But somebody was getting so excited because there was a Hitchcock shot that was kind of like on this when Abergast, the private eye dies, like where he gets stabbed.
Down the stairs?
Yeah, it's like he stays in the foreground, the background moves. Like there was a shot kind of like that in MTV Scream, and somebody was like flipping out about it. I was like, well, that shot's been used quite a bit since then by different people in different contexts. The fact that they made that reference doesn't, to me, make that episode any better.
No, this is it's the referencing the most famous horror film of all time. In the one of the documentaries, there's like an hour and a half documentary that's on there too. I watched it. It was awesome. I think it's in that documentary that the director of The Exorcist, I can never pronounce his name.
William Friedkin.
Friedkin. He said, he aped that shot too, going down the stairs, but he kind of didn't. He thought he figured it out, but he really didn't. At least from what they showed a clip from it, and I was trying to think, okay, yeah. He said, I figured out Hitchcock attached the camera to him and then threw him back. But, obviously he didn't do that at all. And they even say it multiple times in the documentary. Like, no, they did like a back projection. They put a camera on a rig going down the stairs, shot that, and then put the actor in a chair and just had him swivel around, holding his hands up. And then they composited them together. Yeah. Because Hitchcock wanted it to be like really stylized. Like he wanted to get people's attention. Like that would draw your eye because it didn't look, actually super realistic.
It's one of those scenes that with modern technology, with 30 minutes and a pop-up green screen, you can create an effect that realistically looks better because technology's advanced so much. But when that was first shown to audiences, I've been interested to see what their reaction was. Because back then you didn't have IMDb and Twitter and Facebook where everybody to bitch about stuff or to talk about or compare things. So I'd be interested to see what people thought of like those cinematic techniques and the shower sequence, like how it's constructed in the era when you didn't get to go watch a YouTube video breaking it down scene by scene or something, like how people handled that.
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm trying to think of other tidbits in this. It's just I think to me probably the scariest scene in the entire movie that I hadn't watched this from start to finish in a little while. So one of the scenes that I thought was the most striking and actually scariest is and it's one of the more aside from the shower stabbing and the Abergast death, when Mary's sister Lila is in the basement and finds Norma Bates' body and turns the chair around. And then Norman's wearing like the full mother get up with a knife and he runs into the doorway because it lingers on the doorway for just a little bit for him to run into it. And like that was actually still an effective kind of creepy scene, even in the context of having seen everything that aped it and all the stuff after. I still thought that scene was chilling to watch.
I mean, I think like every time you watch that scene, it's great, and it doesn't lose its effect at all, which is just speaks volumes to it. Originally, I think too, Bernard Herrmann did the score for it. I think he did not score that specific scene, and it was either Hitchcock or Hitchcock's assistant. Both they were kind of discussing like, hey, what about we reuse the theme from the shower there? So originally that was just silent with it, and then they did that, and it was just popped. They were like, oh yes, like that's it. Yeah,
because you go from a dead body to like something popping out, and you have to give props to Anthony Perkins because he just had like a demented evil facial expression because it's him as his mother killing some people.
And they said that was a big thing too, having him in drag.
Yeah, and it's funny listening to the end discussion, like when they're in the police station, they're discussing what's a transvestite and what's not.
Yeah, the writer, they actually interviewed the writer too. He's still around, or at least was at the time of the shooting. And he said at first the censor said, you can't say transvestite, and he said, well, why not? And they thought it was something very like, I guess, kind of a slang for, some sort of sexual term. And he said, no, it's like in the dictionary. And he showed it to them. They're like, oh, okay, that's fine then. And that's, they let him keep it in there.
Transvestite it is. But and two, like, yeah, so like this movie has some of the most iconic scenes of all time. has performances, I think, for film lovers, still staying up and are worth watching. Like I said, I would like to show this to some people who have never seen it before, but it's kind of weird for me to invite some, 16-year-olds over to my house to hang out. It's like, hey, kids, you want to come watch a movie? I got candy and ice cream.
Yeah, I mean, as long as, people aren't giggling that it's old, if they can just get past that for a moment, the story's great. It's clean. It's, it's very economically told. You know what I mean? Like every scene counts. Every character, every character is great. I think all the actors are. It's just it moves so well, and even almost feel like as good as the beginning is. Once Janet Leigh gets killed, it almost moves faster then because it's like, things are on, and it's weird. It's a weird thing because you would think it would start moving slower because it's like, okay, we've kind of reset now, but it almost goes even faster then. And we should mention that's Jamie Lee Curtis's mom.
Yeah,
for some people that don't know.
And too, like that, I think that's a switcheroo of genre and what the film is. It's like, it's like this suspense crime story. And then it kind of switches gears into something completely different. And this character that you ostensibly thought was going to be the main character is gone. And other movies have done that since then. But I'm sure to audiences at the time who saw, Janet Leigh as one of the biggest stars were kind of incredibly surprised by that decision.
Yeah. And I always thought it was Hitchcock. I always thought he would kind of pull that. And granted, Hitchcock is credited with surrounding himself with, good creatives, writers, everybody, to help build this, and he made the decisions to do these things when presented to him. But it was Joseph Stefano, I think, that came up with the idea of actually doing that, and Hitchcock agreed to it and loved it. But that's like one of my favorite things of this film. That, and I like it when other films do it too. When they effectively and kind of unknowingly pull the rug out from underneath you, and they change perspectives. But they do it in a graceful way. You know what I mean? Because not every film does that. Like you can kind of, the arcs of a film and kind of what happens in the hills and the valleys that characters are going to hit. But when a film changes and resets, that kind of throws you off. And then you're like, okay, I actually don't know where this is going next. And it just kind of, it's just a great thing when films do that, I think. And then when they do it effectively.
Yeah. So, Derek, do you have any other thoughts on this?
No, I just think it's one of the few movies that I think, even though it's older than, your Friday 13s and your, Halloweens and your movies like that, I think it just holds up so much better because there's a lot more substance to it, and the acting's really, even like I said, it's a completely different style of acting almost because it's from the 60s, but it's still very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, he put some great character actors in there, even like some smaller parts. Like he was very selective, and that's what keeps you interested in it.
Yeah, and just one of the scenes I liked a lot, and it's just kind of like it's not really a major scene, but when Janet Leigh takes a half day because she said she wasn't feeling well, later on her way to leave, flee town with the $40,000. She sees her boss crossing the street.
Oh yeah.
And just I think it's funny because I don't know. I just enjoyed that scene because it's kind of like she waves at him and realizes what she did.
Yeah, and then that's stuck with her for the rest of her existence. You know what I mean? She's like, oh no.
And then
it's funny to think about it because like Sean said, it sticks with her for the rest of her existence, and she ends up getting killed. So it's and it really didn't matter what happened, but it's like you said, it just kind of has it all a little bit. It's got the suspense and the thrill in it. And, even though I've seen and the movie story, it's still kind of interesting to see the progression of Bates from when you first see him to when he's fully broken down at the end of the movie.
Yeah, there's so many reasons to rewatch this film. And Hitchcock thought, too, he thought, once people see it once and they know the gimmick or whatever, it's going to have a short shelf life. He thought the twist is going to be it, and that's done. And he was worried about that, one. And also, two, I think it was his assistant brought up the fact, hey, what if people come in halfway through the film and Janet Leigh's not there? And they're going to be like, well, where the hell is Janet Leigh? She's advertised in the film. Why isn't she in this? So, they kind of jokingly said like, hey, maybe we should make it where people can't enter the film after it starts. And then he kind of worked with a lot, I think all the theater chains, and then they actually mandated that like you could not go in if the film had already started. And of course that created even more buzz about it. Just, it was a gimmick, but at the same time it mattered for the story. But Hitchcock was all about that. Like he liked talking to the audience, again, like you said, the trailers, like he very much was aware of anything he did to the audience had an effect on the movie going experience. It's just super smart,
And something I don't think anybody could do today. I mean, like, I'm trying to think of it. Like,
no. Yeah.
Because even some of the most prolific, profitable directors, people don't really know who they are. Mm-hmm. Like, could you imagine if the trailer for the new Transformers was Michael Bay walking people through the set and pointing it? Because it really would just be like a big, huge, like 300-foot tall green screen. He's like, well, this is where Optimus Prime is, and this is where the Dinobots come in. And
I would be like, do they even make a movie? I feel like they're tricking me, because why aren't they showing the movie? You know what I mean? That's what your immediate thought would be. Like, is this a Kickstarter campaign? Are they just trying to get money for it and they haven't made it yet?
But like, the only way that you could do what Hitchcock did there is if you have a name brand that people trust. And you don't want to spoil the story, because I remember, like, I read too that Anthony Perkins and Janet Leigh had like limited, interaction with, the media and talking about the movie, like before it came out, while it was out, to not spoiling the story.
Yeah, he was very protective about people finding about Mother, and he'd even like send out casting for it, and then put different people in the role of her throughout the film. So that way it would, everybody would throw everybody off. And basically it was just kind of the people in Hollywood, because if they found out, then everybody would find out, especially the media that wrote about films and everything like that.
So I guess like the closest like modern day things that would correlate to that are like, I believe Scream 2, the script leaked while they were shooting. So they rewrote the ending to have a different killer, or to change around with the from just being one or two killers. They changed who the killers were and changed the motivations, so people didn't know what happened. Then you had like Game of Thrones was trying to hide that, whether or not a character was dead, to the point that they're making the actor lie on every single talk show and interview he gave, and there was a haircut watch.
And then, hey, The Walking Dead.
The Walking Dead supposedly shot 11 death scenes, which, once again, if true, is completely idiotic, and I don't understand it. But, I just wish that more people working on films today would kind of shoot for, the aesthetic, or what Hitchcock kind of achieved, versus a lot of schlocky, like, knockoff grindhouse stuff. But, it's what sells, and, a lot of the stuff with, like, Hitchcock-style stories, there's a lot of stories that have already been told, and people, that milieu, like, I would love to see somebody make a horror film with the cast and style of Mad Men. Like, kind of a throwback. But that's not going to happen, because people wouldn't go out to see it. But
I mean, that's the thing, that the Hitchcock style too, it's, it was his style. A lot of people take elements from it, but on its own, I think I'm not saying it has to evolve, but you know what I mean? It's one of those things where, one, nobody else is Hitchcock, so they can't just say, "Oh, I'm going to make this like Hitchcock would make it." You just can't, because nobody else is Hitchcock but Hitchcock. His personality comes through on every film so much as well. But yeah, I mean, definitely there's plenty of directors that pull from him. Like, I always bring up De Palma because I love him, and De Palma's like the hugest, Hitchcock thief there is, but he admits as much, and he's very open about it, and like points out, oh, I did this, like, like when Hitchcock did this or that. So, and that's why I love De Palma too, because he's almost like another generation that really took up the mantle, and kind of, I like watching his films because it's like somebody who is kind of updated in their own personal way, but still is very much a fan of that type of story. You know what I mean? The MacGuffin and kind of a lot of mystery built in with some murder, and then De Palma with a lot of sex sometimes. But yeah, and even Scorsese, he does a little bit of that too. He's a huge Hitchcock fan as well.
Yeah. See, so and to the Blu-ray set that you'd mentioned, so that is the Alfred Hitchcock The Essentials Collection limited edition Blu-ray, and it had what movies did it have in it? It had Psycho, North by Northwest, Vertigo, Rear Window, and The Birds. So we'll probably try to cover some of those here in the future. So, so is there any other final thoughts you want to get to before we wrap this up?
I mean, we could say a million things about this film. I highly recommend, if you're interested in it all, picking up that box set, 1, and then 2, you can just spend for there's a lot of material in the bonus features that you could dig through. And it's some fascinating stuff for sure. Some great interviews. Janet Leigh and the writer Joseph Stefano has some great insights on there. Derek?
I don't really have anything else to add about it. I just think that if you haven't seen it, you really need to. And if you haven't watched it in a while, you need to watch it again because it's just such an overall good film.
And 2, if you have Netflix, they have Alfred Hitchcock Presents on there. So I'd watched some of those recently, and a little bit different, a little bit to get used to the that style of TV again, because I only watched that in a while, but it's definitely interesting. So firmly, I think
some of the best episodes though aren't on Netflix.
Yeah, because I don't think it was the full.
Yeah, I went through a list and was like, okay, what's some of the better ones? I did that a while back too, and then a lot of those aren't on there, disappointingly. Which, he didn't direct all of those, but he directed some of them.
And there's 268 episodes, so there's more than a few. And it ran for about 7 years, from 1955 to 62. So I think we can go ahead and firmly say that Psycho ranks as one of our top films. We'll need to go through at some point and do a top 10 and have everybody involved in the site vote and try to see what we can put as a consensus. But so I guess that concludes our discussion of Psycho. If you're enjoying the podcast, you can do us a huge favor and go out to iTunes and leave a review. That just helps other people find the podcast, and that's kind of the most relevant place to leave information about it. And also, if you're listening via YouTube or via Google Play or Stitcher or via RSS download, you can... Well, you can't really leave comments there, but you can leave comments on the social media post. Or on YouTube, you can leave comments. We got a number of good comments on YouTube, so you can always leave something there. But you can always send us an email at podcast@housebyvideostore.com if there's any corrections or omissions. I know last week I listened to the Clown podcast. I realized that I interchangeably and incorrectly use antagonist and protagonist. And I said antagonist when I meant to say protagonist a few times.
I never caught that.
When I listened back to it, I was like, I sound like an idiot because I used it correctly a few times. But I was like, no, I just meant that there's a lot of movies that don't have good lead characters that you care about, the protagonist. Yeah. And they focus on the antagonist, and they're not even interesting either. So that was just the point I was trying to make, and I don't know how I use those words incorrectly, but there's stuff you catch like that. You can send us an email at podcast@housebyvideostore.com, and we will discuss that on podcast in the future. And you can find all the work we're doing at housebyvideostore.com. There's links there to all of our social media accounts and everything we're doing. And there's links to our Patreon as well if you want to help us out with the different fees and podcasts and what have you, and working on original content as we're still working through the short film we shot and then trying to plan some upcoming projects. But
yeah, we want to stream some more stuff too, and maybe get some webcams or some actual cameras on a switcher. Because I've streamed recently a little bit on Twitch. That's twitch.com, I think /housebythevideostore. Going to do a little bit of game coverage on there. Just sometimes we'll save it and archive it, but I think really the only stuff we'll put on YouTube is maybe brand new horror game releases. But I've been playing some older stuff on there occasionally and everything. So add us on there if you're interested in games at all.
And if we get enough webcams, we'll make Derek turn one on so his dogs can be on it all day.
Yeah, you watch the dog cam.
But yeah, like I said, everything you can find at housebyvideostore.com. And if you will find us on the internet specifically, you can find me on Twitter at will_droid.
Derek?
You can find me on pretty much everything now because I even created a new Twitter so everything will be under Meta World Derek.
Yeah, and I'm at Blevin Sean. And also, too, one more time, I want to mention that we did a soundtrack swap of Psycho, and it follows. Two great soundtracks for sure. But anyway, just uploaded it directly to Facebook for the first time. Before, it was just on Vimeo. So also, if you're on YouTube, it's never been on there because of copyright issues. So if you go to our Facebook page, it'll be one of the most recent posts. You can watch it on there. Just reposted it because of this podcast.
Yep. So that will bring this episode of the House by Video Store podcast to a close. Thanks for listening.